News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
It's 6 o'clock. A very good evening. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB Newsroom. Let's get you up to date with the headlines. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has spoken to French President Emmanuel Macron in an effort to address the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Downing Street says the two leaders are united. In their view, aid must be allowed into the besieged enclave. The United Nations is warning that civil order is starting to fade there. Thousands of people broke into aid centres earlier in a desperate search for basic supplies. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Red Crescent says Israel's told them to immediately evacuate the Al-Quds hospital in Gaza, which is around 400 patients, and some 14,000 people taking refuge there. The Gaza Health Ministry said this morning just over 8,000 people have been killed in the last 3 weeks as Israel forces expand their ground operations. Now, it's unlikely any Labour MPs will be sacked because of disagreements with the party's position on Israel. That's according to the Shadow Science Secretary. Peter Kyle says the party's leadership will probably continue engaging with frontbenchers despite disagreements with Sir Keir Starmer. He's echoed the UN's call for a humanitarian pause in the fighting and for aid to be allowed into Gaza. But many senior figures want him to go further and back a ceasefire. The Hollywood actor Matthew Perry, star of the legendary sitcom Friends, has died at the age of 54.
Forget hypnosis. The way to quit smoking is you have to dance naked in a field of heather and then bathe in the sweat of 6 healthy young men.
Or what my father calls Thursday night.
Police were called to his home in Los Angeles, where he was found unresponsive in a hot tub. Perry became a household name as the dry and witty Chandler Bing, alongside his 5 central co-stars, Jennifer Aniston, Courtney Cox, Matt LeBlanc, Lisa Kudrow and David Schwimmer. They went on to have the iconic show in the 1990s. Warner Brothers have said in a statement his comedic genius was felt around the world and his legacy will live on in the hearts of many. Police are being encouraged to double their use of facial recognition software over the next 6 months to help track down known offenders. Policing Minister Chris Philps says the technology could be used to scan more than 200,000 images while matching them against the police database. He's also encouraged officers to expand the use of live facial recognition software so offenders might be identified on the spot. Mr Philps says it will allow police to stay one step ahead of the criminals and make Britain's streets safer. And Scotland's Refugees Minister is asking the UK government for urgent funding to help communities house migrants. Emma Roddick supports the government's plan to cut the use of hotels for asylum seekers and says tackling a backlog in cases should be a priority. But she warns that shifting the financial burden onto local authorities would be unacceptable and reckless. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says the number of hotels used to house migrants will be cut by 50 over the next 3 months. Well, that is it for the moment. We're live across the UK on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker too. That's it. But now it is time for Gloria Meets.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be back with you on GB News. Lovely to see you this morning. Michelle Donelan joins me now. Lovely to see you this morning, Secretary of State. I just wanted to start on the AI. Lovely to see you. I wanted to start on this AI summit. So we know that China are coming, but we don't think that we're going to have any representation from the US, Canada, Germany, France, Japan or Italy. So is this summit being snubbed by everyone but the Chinese?
No, I mean, that list that you've just read out is completely wrong. Basically, we haven't produced the guest list or who's RSVP'd. Yes, because this is a summit of this scale, you would expect that. Hence why there's been speculation over who's coming. But what you will see next week is that we have every corner of the globe in attendance. We have the top companies that are working in this space. We have some of the best and the brightest thinkers from across the globe in civil society. We will be having a really targeted discussion around these highly capable models, around the risks and the opportunities for the very first time, I should add.
OK, so who's the most senior world leader who's attending apart from Rishi Sunak then?
I can't go into that because we have had a clear policy not to give a running commentary on the guest list. But you only have a few days left to wait and see. What I can tell you is you will see representation from across the globe, and the engagement and the level of interest in this summit has been extremely high because it's very timely. The next set of models will be coming out next year. We have a short window now to be very proactive, be on the front foot, drill into the risks, properly understand those risks, so that we can seize the opportunities for our public services, for our NHS,
but we do know,
transport network.
But we do know who isn't going. We know that Emmanuel Macron isn't going, Joe Biden isn't going. So, I mean, can you have a global summit without some of these key heads of government attending?
Well, the Vice President of America has already come out and said that she is attending, and obviously she's extremely senior in terms of representing America. So I don't think it's fair to characterise it as not having the heavyweights around the table. We have day one and day two. On day one, we will see multiple of my counterparts there. We will see representation from all of the big AI companies as well as smaller ones as well. And as I said, great wealth of expertise from civil society.
Okay.
Academics and scientists to add to that debate and conversation about what more can countries do, but also what more can the companies do to really put up the right guardrails and safety processes so that we can lean into this. We can get those opportunities.
So are Liz Truss and Ian Duncan-Smith worrying unnecessarily about the presence of the Chinese? Obviously, there is a concern about Chinese hacking, and you're inviting them to our AI summit.
Well, this isn't just our AI summit. We are, of course, convening the world for the first time, but this needs to be a proper global conversation. And let's face it, it is undeniable that China are a leading AI nation. They're not just consumers of AI, they're producers of AI as well, the second in the world. If we're going to have a really productive conversation, if we're going to be strategic about this, we have to at least try to talk to and work with China. Absolutely, there are areas where we won't want to inform them about certain parts of our work because of national security, but we need to at least try and bring them to the table. It's akin to climate change. If we're going to really have an impact, we need to work together.
OK, let's move on to just another story that's on the front page of the Sunday Mirror. Do you think that your colleague Tom Purseglove should have been out campaigning this weekend with Peter Bone following his suspension from the Tory party?
Well, look, I don't know the full details.
He was out campaigning with him this weekend.
This was no, it's my understanding that it was a local campaign action day for a local by-election. Obviously, Tom, as the local MP, would be there. Peter Bone also happened to attend.
Should Peter Bone have been there?
That's a question that you need to ask Tom.
I'm asking you, though, should Peter Bone have been there?
We have stripped the whip. Yes, Well, what we have done is we have stripped the whip from Peterbone very swiftly. There's obviously been an investigation. He's been suspended from the House as well. I was not obviously in that area. I'm an MP in a different
Should
region,
he have been there?
What I can tell you is the government has acted quickly here. Well, that is a decision for him. He is no longer a Conservative.
What do you think,
One would argue he shouldn't therefore be campaigning. Well, he shouldn't therefore be campaigning on behalf of the Conservative
he shouldn't
Party.
have been
no longer
there.
A Conservative MP would be my view.
So he shouldn't have been there?
Well, my view is if you're not a Conservative, you shouldn't... Well, yes, but I wouldn't put it as simple as that. I'd say that if you're not a Conservative, you shouldn't be advertising and promoting the Conservative Party.
Okay.
I mean, that seems like common sense to me.
Let's move on to the situation in Gaza. We know a particular case is Hamza Yousaf's family. I know there are plenty of others. This is his in-laws live in Dundee. They're British citizens. Can you give us any insight at all as to how the government might be helping Hamza Yousaf's in-laws get out of Gaza and indeed other British citizens?
Yeah, as you say, there are multiple families up and down the UK that are deeply impacted by this, and I just want to say that my thoughts and prayers are with them as they go through something that must be absolutely awful. And there are 200 people, I believe, on the ground in Gaza who have registered with our Foreign Office that are British nationals. We are trying to ensure that we can get that border open so that we can get those people home and we can maintain contact with them. And I know that the Foreign Secretary is prioritising this area. In fact, I spoke to him just last night and he reassured me by saying this is one of his top priorities.
Do you think that the police should be treating people who cry for jihad on the streets of London for hate crimes?
I think that we have very stringent laws in this country around terrorism and also the Public Order Act, and the police should be using the full weight of the law to ensure that people aren't inciting.
Are they not at the moment?
Hatred. It is not okay. It is not okay to be shouting jihad on our public streets. The Home Secretary has been addressing these issues directly with our police, and we continue to talk to them to make sure that they are utilising the full weight of the law to ensure that we can maintain public order and we can protect our citizens, which is the top priority of any government.
So is Max Hill, the head of the CPS, wrong then? Because he says that it doesn't necessarily mean it's a hate crime.
So, look, operational decisions are in the hands of the police. They are operationally independent. And, of course, they will have more information around the context of things, etc. But what we are saying is our law is robust. It needs to be applied in that fashion. It is not OK to incite violence or hatred on our streets. It is not OK to be doing that in relation to prescribed terrorist organisations as well.
Is it right to be saying from the river to the sea on the streets of London when everybody knows what the implication of those words are for the Israelis?
Well, yeah, on that very phrase, the implications are the eradication of Israel, which is deeply not just offensive, but also deeply dangerous in terms of its sentiment, if that is how it is being applied. So the police absolutely need to be mindful of that. And the Home Secretary has been very clear, and I believe wrote to police forces on that very topic, along with others.
Ms Donelan, very, very briefly, because we're running out of time, should universities also clear up their act when it comes to Jew hate?
Anti-Semitism has no place in any part of our society, including our universities. That is something that I was very strict on when I was Universities Minister, and I know that the current Department for Education ministerial team have been too. They have written to all universities already and reiterated that, because, look, our universities are where the minds of tomorrow are shaped. It is not acceptable for anti-Semitism to be allowed to proliferate.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning, Michelle Donelan. Lovely to speak to you. Now, despite flying high in the polls this week, Starmer's Labour Party has been engulfed with infighting over how to react to the Israel-Hamas war. I'll be speaking to one of the party's rebel MPs, Khaled Mahmood, in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, let's bring Khaled Mahmood into the conversation. He's the Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr. He's also the longest-serving Muslim MP in Parliament. And this week he organised a meeting between Keir Starmer and Muslim MPs. Khaled, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us. I was really intrigued by a piece you wrote, I think it was for The Times, criticising the Muslim Council of Britain for its response to the murder of 1,400 Israelis by Hamas. Do you not think that there have been enough mainstream Muslim voices condemning Hamas?
I think there's been a lot of Muslim mainstream voices now that have condemned Hamas. I, again, want to condemn Hamas for the 7th of October. I think it was totally barbaric. But I think also one issue has to be raised is that where was the responsibility of the IDF and the government to allow these people to run riot for 6 hours before any action was taken? I think so. The Netanyahu has some questions to answer as well for allowing this escalation to take place.
When we look at the protests that are going on in the streets of London, one thing that confuses me, and maybe you can help me with this, Khaled, is we've always heard that it is obviously Islamophobic to try and conflate in any way peaceful Muslims with any kind of terror atrocity. And yet at the same time, we have seen these pro-Palestinian marches on the streets of London and elsewhere who seem to be happy to share a platform with people who are supporting terrorists, who are supporting Hamas. How do we square that circle, Khaled?
Well, I think those people don't help the cause of the people. You know, over the last almost 21 years since I've been in Parliament, that I've always fought against since 9/11, against terrorism, radicalisation, in the UK and terrorism generally across the world. And that does no good to any community, certainly to the Muslim community, to have those people on board. What we've got to do is get the mainstream of the community having a peaceful protest, highlighting the issues that he wants to highlight. And that's the only way forward.
When the Met Police and the head of the CPS talk about this many meanings of jihad, is that right? Or if people are calling for jihad on the streets of London in the context of a pro-Palestinian march, where also people are talking about Jews in very anti-Semitic terms, how should we interpret that use of the word jihad?
Well, first of all, any form of anti-Semitism is deplorable. has his anti-Muslim feelings also, I think, in the same way. But I think, look, there are lots of meanings to jihad. And I think also we have to be very careful, those people that are using the word jihad, to understand what environment that they're using it in. And I think it's difficult for the police to be able to determine that. And that's a real issue. I don't know what operational guidance that there will be for them to do that. But I think in order to have a proper representation of the people that are suffering in Gaza, you don't need to bring these sort of words into that arena.
On the subject of a ceasefire, Khaled, I know there are a mounting number of Labour MPs now calling for Keir Starmer to support a ceasefire. He's talked about humanitarian pauses. He's previously says that Israel has a right to defend itself. Where should the Labour leader go from here? Because this infighting within the party seems to only be getting worse.
Well, I think, look, I think Sir Keir met us, as you said, last week. He's agreed to meet us again as soon as we want to be able to meet and see whether how the situation progresses. So he's quite keen and happy to do that. I think, look, this has been a very quick evolving situation. And sometimes politically trying to keep abreast of it has been difficult. So Sir Keir, last week on Wednesday, issued a statement on pauses. I think now the United Nations are calling for a sort of, again, a cessation of violence. There's been a vote taken on that. And we need to move forward, whatever the term is, whether it's ceasefire, cessation of violence, or a pause. We need to stop the fighting and get aid into those people which are suffering hugely.
Is there ever going to be a hope, though, Khaled, of such a kind of diplomatic or military downing of weapons when Israel are having to negotiate with actual terrorists who have a founding charter which commits itself to the annihilation of all Jews? How do you broker a ceasefire with a terrorist organisation?
I think, first of all, look, I have no love lost for Hamas. I think what they're doing is putting a lot of people in harm's way, and I think also, Israel has a responsibility to look at the amount of people that are being killed through the action that's going on. But as far as Hamas is concerned, what you will only resolve this by dialogue. Nobody will resolve this by any form of military action. And of course, the lives of those hostages that are there, it's important that we get those people out. Qatar has said that they will support to try and bring those people out, but there's got to be, again, a cessation of violence. But the only way to negotiate with Hamas is getting the Arab League, the people from the Gulf region, to sit together, work with them, and then will have to ultimately be a United Nations and an Arab League force going into there and try and clear that out. That's the only way you're going to do it. You're not going to do it by a particular violence and war that's going on at the moment.
Yeah. What's your reaction to your colleague Shabana Mahmood? She has said that Israel is guilty of collective punishment in Gaza. She's the Shadow Justice Secretary. Should she be using that language?
Well, look, what's happening at the moment in Gaza is very difficult. And when you've got people that have no choice in a very built-up urban environment, and those people are being attacked like that, I think there has to be a cessation in that violence to stop that. I think people are trapped. So what words can you use? I don't know what words are right to use in this example or not. But the fact is, Netanyahu didn't respond in time to allow these people take lives of 1,400 Israelis.
I know, but it's still the fault of the terrorists. It's the fault of the terrorists for taking the lives, surely.
No, but why? No. IDF and the government has a responsibility to Israeli citizens to ensure that they keep them safe. In this instance, for 6 hours, they allowed these people to run riot and not do anything. Where's the inquiry into that? Where are the facts around that? And so you can't now just abuse the fact that we've got a right to defend because those people died. Where's the questions answered on that?
Khaled Mahmood, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Lovely to speak to you. Now, I'm joined now by the former Defence Secretary, Michael Portillo, who will be presenting his GB News show, as usual, after this show from 11. Now, I recall, Michael, I think you were Defence Secretary around the time of the signing of the Oslo Accords, about 30 years ago. Could you have envisaged then what is now happening in Israel?
Well, Israel has always been in this unstable position, surrounded by very hostile forces, and has had to arm itself to the teeth. and indeed prevent terrorists from entering its territory. And the prevention of terrorists entering its territory is what is characterised by others as being the repressing of the populations in those places where the people are restrained behind fences and walls. So I suppose, yes, I mean, one could foresee a reigniting of violence. There was a period when Israel was very successful, of course, brokered a peace with Egypt after the Yom Kippur War, which was a catastrophic failure by the invading forces from Egypt and Syria. And so, you know, Israel has been through a relatively stable period, but in that period, it has not ceased to be in danger, and the forces against it, although they're now not neighbouring state actors, that it's not Egypt anymore, which is the threat. It is these terrorist organisations which apparently are backed by Iran, which is, of course, not exactly a neighbour. So the threat is there, and one of the traps that was built for Israel was that the threat from terror was so great that it would have to take extraordinary measures that we don't associate readily with a democracy, like building walls and fences and restricting people's freedom of movement and so on. And all of that has built up a lot of public opinion around the world against Israel, but one has to sympathise with Israel because it is trying to survive in a situation where, as you've just pointed out, it is surrounded by people who are determined to destroy it.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Donelan and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, as promised, I'm joined by James Schneider. He's the former comms chief for Jeremy Corbyn, and Justin Cohen, who's the news editor at the Jewish News. Lovely to see you both this morning. Let's start. Should there be a ceasefire, James?
Yes, there absolutely has to be a ceasefire, and that's why
the overwhelming majority of people on Earth, the overwhelming majority of people in the UK and the US all support it because it's plain common sense. You can see that you don't respond to the killings of one group of children with the mass killings of another group of children.
But Israel's got a right to defend itself against a terror attack, hasn't it?
Israel has an absolute right to defend itself. It does not have an absolute right to indiscriminitely kill children. To engage in
indiscriminately killing children, Justin?
War crimes.
But the fact is that if Israel was to engage with a ceasefire at this point, it would be raising the white flag. It would be the international community accepting that Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself against the ultimate acts of barbarity. And it would be also a admission that this kind of terrorism could be exported elsewhere in the world. That's what would happen if Israel was to raise the white flag at this point.
I mean, isn't that a point? You know, what could happen if there's a ceasefire is Hamas could just regroup. They're terrorists. They're not really to be bargained or reasoned with. Do they then put down their weapons? What's to stop... If Hamas want humanitarian aid to come into Gaza and indeed for Palestinian people to be safer, why don't they hand back the hostages? Why don't they stop using people as human shields?
The reason why you need to have a ceasefire is there is no military solution to the dispossession of the Palestinian people. This is not going to be resolved. What will happen if Gaza is entirely flattened? If every single person that's even crossed the street near someone who's a Hamas operative has been killed?
Well, is Israel talking about flattening Hamas?
No, but it's not... I'm sorry, it's not flattening Hamas. If you have 8,000 civilians who have died, over 3,000 children, whole neighbourhoods completely flattened. That's not flattening Hamas. That is flattening the Palestinian people.
Justin.
That is flattening people. That's flattening children who have hope.
That's a good point,
who have lives, who deserve to be alive.
There's a big difference between what happened on the 7th of October and what's happening now. There seems to be...
Yes, there is. One is of a hugely tremendous, larger scale than the other.
There seems to be an absolute insistence from people like Jeremy Corbyn and other people to draw a parallel between the two things. On October the 7th was the culmination of a 10-month plan by Hamas terrorists to go into people's homes, to rape women, to behead children, to do the most unspeakable crimes. And Israel didn't want that. Israel is now responding to those acts to defend its citizens. It cannot have Hamas on the border and risk this happening again. No government could allow that to be the case.
Israel isn't defending its citizens.
But how do you suggest that it does defend its
Israel
citizens?
is not defending its citizens.
But how should it do it if it doesn't do it like this?
I'll answer. The hostages are made no safer. In fact, they're put far more at risk, which is why some family members of some of the hostages went to see Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier this week asking to delay the ground offensive, because very clearly negotiation is the way to bring back the hostages. And for Israeli security, for the security of people in Israel, the only solution, the only long-term solution is to end the decades-long dispossession of the Palestinian people. Gaza has been now, for 17 years, an open-air prison. People have tried peaceful, and I do not support armed... People have tried peaceful things. When, for example, March 2018, tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza marched peacefully, unarmed, to the border to protest against them being in a prison camp. They were shot with snipers. Over 200 unarmed protesters killed. Over 6,000
You're describing
people.
Gaza as an open prison.
As David Cameron did.
Justin?
James, it depends how far back you want to take this, but let's go back to 2005, for example, the disengagement from Gaza. Israel ripping its own citizens out of their homes forcibly. I remember covering the fallout from this on our front pages. It was extremely painful for a lot of Israelis and a lot of Jews. But it did it in order to hand back a piece of land that it had been asked for a long time by the Palestinians and by the international community to hand back. It handed it back, and now look what's happened. We've had decades of rocket attacks from that strip, and now we've had the most barbaric attacks that this world has seen for decades. What do you want to be done about Hamas on the border of Israel? That's the question.
Israel has continued to occupy Gaza since 2005 under international law. The reason why Israel can shut off food, fuel, water, electricity, internet, phone lines is because it has a total blockade by land, by air and by sea of Gaza.
How is Hamas firing rockets if it doesn't have any power?
How do you mean?
Well, Hamas clearly has been stockpiling utilities, right, in the tunnels.
Perhaps they have.
But what's your explanation for why they aren't helping the people of Palestine? That they're the government of this area and they are not helping the people of Palestine, because we understand that they're stockpiling fuel and supplies for their own terror attacks.
Israel has an extremely advanced, extremely effective defence shield, the Iron Dome, against Hamas's rockets. Hamas's rockets, it has fired thousands of rockets over the last two decades, and I think 34 Israelis have been killed by those rockets.
James,
now,
come on, again, you know better than that.
The threat from Hamas's rockets does not legitimise the complete destruction of Gaza, which is taking place now, and the loss of thousands of children's lives.
The intention of each and every one of those rockets is to kill civilians. Yes, Israel has indeed invested in the Iron Dome. Hamas has invested in tunnels for decades. Its leaders, having a lovely time in Doha at the moment, have billions of pounds. There is no need for the Palestinian people, for the people of Gaza, to be in the situation they're in. The reason they're in that situation is because of Hamas.
No, it isn't. The reason why the people of Gaza are in the situation they're in is because they have been dispossessed and denied by an occupying power for decades. That is the reality. And now that power is killing children in a way which is utterly unjustifiable.
Can we bring it domestic for a moment? Because obviously we saw the Palestinian peace marches yesterday in the streets of London. Some say there weren't peaceful elements. Some say that some were using language which appeared to support not only the October the 7th attack, but a degree of Jew hate on the streets of London. Can we have a discussion about whether it is appropriate for protesters to be saying from the river to the sea?
It's entirely appropriate.
But
hold on, please let me answer.
It means the elimination of Israel.
No, it doesn't. Please let me answer. It's entirely appropriate. I'm very proud that we had 500,000 people on the streets of London yesterday calling for a ceasefire. That was what that protest was about. And it's probably the largest protests we've seen on the streets of London since those that opposed the Iraq War in 2003. The overwhelming majority of British people want to see a ceasefire, and they're raising their voice because that is the morally justified position.
Okay.
And any attempts, and there have been many, many attempts, to characterise these basic human progressive protests as being anti-Jewish. They're not anti-Jewish. I went on one, I marched with the Jewish lot.
It is anti-Jewish when people start protesting outside the Sydney Opera House and saying, gas the Jews, gas the Jews. Well, it is anti-Semitic when people start wearing pictures of paragliders on the back of their jackets.
People, of course, shouldn't say gas the Jews. That's unbelievably offensive. But to suggest that 500,000 people calling for dignity and life for children are somehow being anti-Semitic is a vile slur and is completely false.
So Justin, from the river to the sea.
Well, let's start on an element of agreement. I would almost certainly imagine that not every protester on the streets of London yesterday was anti-Semitic or pro-Hamas. And every time I've heard suggestions that they are from members of my own community, from other people, I have rebutted those with every sinew I have. But when you have people on the streets singing for jihad, singing for another intifada, and worse, repeating old chants, recalling battles between Muslims and Jews in which Jews have been slaughtered, that is not... that is anti-Semitic, that is not helping the Palestinian cause, and that action has to be taken by the police and the government and before next Saturday, because that doesn't just that affects people on the streets of British Jews. You must support the police cracking
down on some of these rogue elements, because, as you say, they're giving peaceful marchers a really bad name.
So my largest priority is to have the biggest possible expression of public support for a ceasefire, because our government has a role in this conflict. We support Israel diplomatically. We give it weapons. That is the absolute priority. Of course, there are some fringe...
So Keir Starmer needs to pivot to his position finally,
Well, of course he does. But, of course, there are always fringe elements in some things, and there's some idiots who'll be idiotic. But let's be clear, the overwhelming majority of the British people want a ceasefire, and they're right to do so.
Where do those figures come from, James, actually?
YouGov poll 10 days ago.
Well, that's not a latest figure. And the
let's see the latest figure. I'm sure it's high. higher.
The fact is that Keir Starmer is...
Final point, Justin. Final point, quickly.
Keir Starmer is absorbing a lot of pressure to do what he's doing. Can you imagine what would happen if your former boss had been in power now?
Yes, it would be much better.
No, it wouldn't.
No, it wouldn't.
As a British...
Hamas and Hezbollah aren't friends, though, are they, James?
No, I wouldn't say
no,
they were,
indeed.
no.
All right, Justin, James, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Up next is John Howard, the second longest-serving Prime Minister of Australia. I'll be getting his views on everything from the war in Israel to whether he thinks Rishi Sunak is doing a good job as Prime Minister. Don't go anywhere.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by John Howard. He served as Liberal Party Prime Minister of Australia from 1996 to 2007. He's the second longest-serving Australian Prime Minister in history. John, lovely to see you. You're over for this ARC conference.
I am.
Which we're going to be speaking about, you know, freedom of speech and
and also
policies.
a defence of the achievements of Western civilisation.
Well, we should champion them, shouldn't we?
We
denigrate
should always champion success.
Indeed so. Well, talking of success, you had a lot of success with your gun laws over in Australia. We've seen this horrific situation in Maine. The gunman has been found dead this morning, but at the same time, again, gun laws in America costing countless lives. Australia clamped down on this, and my understanding is you haven't had a mass shooting since. What could the US learn from the Australians?
Well, certainly our clampdown, which happened just after I became Prime Minister, and there was a mass shooting, 35 people killed by one madman in a remote area of Tasmania. We did something, and it had widespread community support, although it did cause a lot of opposition in certain rural areas because farmers legitimately had weapons as part of their daily work. It's easy from a distance to say the Americans should do this, that and the other. The history of that country is different. We didn't fight the British with arms to get our independence. They were happy to give it to us.
Yes.
And there's a different culture, but that having been said, I live in hope that our American friends will do something, but it will require enormous personal courage from an American president.
Indeed so. We were speaking just earlier, I don't know if you caught that debate, but I was talking about that horrific incident outside the Sydney Opera House where some protesters were calling for Jews to be gassed in the aftermath of the October the 7th attack. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people marching for Palestine on the streets of London at the weekend. There has been a suggestion, not least by our own Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, that multiculturalism has failed in the Western world. Do you agree with that analysis?
Well, like, separately from this issue, I have my doubts about multiculturalism. I believe that when you migrate to another country, you should, as far as reasonably, be expected to absorb the mainstream culture of that country. Sure, retain your affection for Greece or Italy or wherever you may have come from, and we've been very successful. I mean, I constantly meet people whose ancestors came to Australia from Greece and Italy and Germany and the Baltic countries immediately after, or more recently from China and India. The most widely spoken foreign language in Australia now is Chinese.
Yes.
There are 1.4 million Australians of Chinese heritage. Now, that all works well. It largely works well, I think, because people are attracted to the foundation mainstream culture of Australia, which is open and tolerant, but also very proud of what our country has achieved. And I think if we put more emphasis on what our nation has achieved and what the Western world has achieved, and we're less apologetic and less inclined to say, oh, we're all to blame, the better we would be.
Has the recent rise in anti-Semitism, not just in the UK, but also in Australia, surprised you, John? In Australia, I don't find a lot of anti-Semitism. I really don't. And I mean, the Jewish community is small, but very proudly Australian, and some of our greatest historical figures, without any doubt our greatest. But you will have seen reports in the UK of the chanting of "From the River to the Sea."
Oh, look, we've had some absolutely unacceptable. I mean, that demonstration outside the Sydney Opera House was shameful. I mean, people saying "gas the Jews," and that was a deliberate invocation of the Holocaust, which was the most foul a deed in human history. 6 million people gassed to death because they were Jewish. Now, that is something that we should all be offended by. But having said all of that, I don't think the average Australian is anti-Semitic, and there are some who are anti-Semitic, just there are some who years ago were anti-Catholic or anti-Protestant. I mean, it's just... But I do think that this latest operation in the Middle East has brought out the double standards for a lot of the world. People have got to understand that the only way you will get lasting settlement in the Middle East is for there to be a full acceptance of Israel's right to exist behind secure, defensible boundaries. Now, until the entire Arab world does that, it's going to be very difficult, in my opinion, to see a lasting settlement.
What was your reaction to the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres' response to this conflict? He seemed to be taking sides.
Well, I don't think he contributed anything. I mean, in the long run, the only basis of a proper settlement is to have a genuine two-state solution.
Yeah, but how is that possible?
Well, it's not going to be possible just by the Secretary-General of the United Nations calling for it or calling for a ceasefire. We'd all love a ceasefire.
Yeah.
We'd all love violence to stop tomorrow, but that's not going to happen. And the latest element in this long-running saga was the terrible attack by Hamas on the 7th of October. Now, that happened, notwithstanding the desire of a lot of peaceful Palestinians, a lot of peaceful Israelis to live together in harmony. And until the reasons for that are rooted out and destroyed, it's going to happen again.
Is the UN fit for purpose, do you think?
Well, I don't think it is fit for purpose, but having said that, I think some of its agencies do good work. I think UNICEF does good work. I think the High Commission for Refugees does some good work, but I think it's sort of plenary ministrations, if I can call it that, often fall well short of the mark.
If you were still PM, what would you be saying to Netanyahu right now?
Well, I would be expressing the strong, unqualified support of the Australian people for the right of Israel to respond with effective military force for what has been a heinous attack on its people.
Let's move over to matters in Australia. I was interested by all of the coverage of the no vote when it came to the Aboriginal voice debate. Was it important that the no vote won?
Well, I thought it was the right outcome. It was a very strong vote. I think it largely happened because deep down Australians recognise that we have a pretty stable, happy, successful, cohesive country. And when somebody comes along without explanation, without any strong argument, and says, we've got to alter the foundation document, we say to ourselves, hang on, what's he up to?
Yes.
What's this mean? There is in the Australian nature what I call a deep Celtic scepticism. We don't like people coming along and say, I'll do this and the world will be beautiful tomorrow.
Yeah.
Our reaction is, what's he want? What's he up to? We don't like this. And then I think, seriously, that lay behind part of this very strong vote.
I mean, it was a convincing vote for no.
Oh, very
Do you
convincing.
think that has a positive knock-on effect when it comes to pro-monarchy sympathies?
Oh, look, I don't think there'll be a vote on the monarchy for years.
Yeah?
I mean, there was one.
I mean, there's a minister for the Republic now that
well, I think we could pension him off at a very early age.
Really?
I think so.
How would you judge the King's first year on the throne to have been?
Oh, look, I don't wish to be in any way patronising. I think he's done a wonderful job, but it's the system of government as much as the person of the monarch that matters. And I think we have seen in recent weeks and months, indeed, some of the difficulties in the United States of an alternative to the parliamentary system. And that's not to say you can't have a parliamentary system without a monarch. I have to acknowledge that intellectually, but I think the whole package comes together rather well. And I think the attitude of many Australians is, gee, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Now, give us some advice to Rishi Sunak. The Tories are in a bit of a pickle. They're 20 points behind. Pressure on the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, to cut taxes in the autumn statement. What advice would John Howard give this duo?
Well, look, I'm not falling for that. I've only met... I've only met Rishi once or twice. Look, I think he obviously faces a huge struggle. He knows that. He's a long way behind in the polls, and the Conservatives have been in power for a long time, and they've been through a few prime ministers recently.
That's right. Can he pull it round?
A big one?
Can he pull it around?
Well, anything's possible. I think one of the things you've got to learn about modern politics is that it's a lot more fluid. When I was first involved in politics, and I think it's true in Britain as it was in Australia, you had a sort of 40-40-20 rule. 40% always voted for the Labor Party, for the Socialists, the centre-left, whatever you call them, and 40% always voted for our side of politics, which of course in Australia is called Liberal, a bit different but Liberal here, and 20% moved around. I now think it's more like 30-30-40, and I think you've got a far more fluid situation, so he may look to be a long way behind. He is a long way behind, he knows that, but he's doing things, he's responding, and...
You'll probably agree he has to stop the boats. Does he need to cut tax in the autumn?
Look, that is entirely a matter for his judgment.
But is it politically expedient to offer that?
Look, people always like paying less tax.
Yes.
But strangely enough, they like to have plenty of government services.
Yes.
And the art of government is putting those two things into balance.
So you would say to the Chancellor, what? Make it a bit more red-bloodedly right-wing?
No, I would say some things to him privately. Publicly, I would respect the difficult job that he has, just as when I was Tony Blair's opposite number. I was, in fact, the only Australian Prime Minister that Tony Blair ever dealt with all. They were on different.
One final word, John. Who would you like to see get the Republican nomination? Trump or someone else?
I couldn't vote for Trump if I were an American, no.
So somebody else?
No, somebody else, because he wouldn't leave the field when he was given out.
Indeed so. John Howard, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So there's been a fair amount of unsettled weather around this weekend, and that's due to this large area of low pressure to the west of the UK. This low pressure out in the North Sea has brought plenty of rain to Scotland and northeastern parts of England throughout Sunday, and this will start to clear away to the east as we go through this evening, bringing some patchier rain though for a time. Elsewhere, showers will continue, especially along southern and western coasts, but there will be some clear spells too, and under these we could see the odd patch of mist and fog, and maybe a touch of frost across the far northwest of Scotland. Showers will continue through Monday morning, though, especially across Wales and southeast England, where they could be heavy and maybe even with the odd rumble of thunder for a time. Some decent sunny spells, though, especially across Scotland and central and eastern parts of England, where we'll see temperatures rising to 14 to 16. Now, as we go into the start of Tuesday, we'll see a band of showers and rain that will move into Northern Ireland overnight, slowly making its way eastwards. Some drier conditions, though, to the northeast of this. Bit of respite in the southwest as well from those showers before this next system moves in overnight Tuesday and into Wednesday. And that unsettled theme really continues throughout the rest of the week, with Storm Ciarán moving through Wednesday night and into Thursday.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we're live an hour later on Sundays from 10. And in my take at 10, why the woke left don't realise that by supporting Hamas terror, they are turkeys voting for Christmas. What would Margaret Thatcher be advising Rishi Sunak to do to win the next election? I'll be asking her former top advisor, Niall Gardner. Plus Anne Widdecombe, the pundit, tomorrow's papers, and more reaction to the shock passing of Friends star Matthew Perry. We're live from 10.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Donelan and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in